Hi everyone, welcome to the Estonian Experience with Stu and Jay. I'm Stuart.
I'm Jason.
And we are going to do a podcast.
Now the main thing is we're going to talk about everything and anything that happens around Estonia, relates to Estonia, and only our opinion, of course. And one of the main things we're going to talk about is what people don't really like to talk about in Estonia.
Yeah, that'll be one of the main things we talk about, the topics that nobody else wants to deal with. For example, Estonians. What do foreigners think of them? They always ask me that. So, tell me about yourself. How long have you been in Estonia and why are you here?
Well, I'm actually here the second time. The first time I came here in 2008. Then I moved back to the US. Right now it's been about 6 years since I'm back to Estonia. And I came here because of the weather, of course. You know, no, I'm just kidding. That's the only reason why most foreigners come to Estonia. So my wife is from Estonia. I was able to locate myself here for about 10 years, more or less, since I started coming on and off into the country, and I love it. Really, I have so far a great experience.
That sounds cool. I think I'm the only foreign man who did not come here for a woman, but that's the reason I stayed, but you know, that's long since over. But I actually came here because I was interested in watching country building. You know, I'd studied diplomacy and stuff in university. And so I've been here for 23 years.
Wow,
that's a long time. I got here, my first time here was in the late 1990s. Wow. What were your first impressions of Estonia?
Well, you know, I knew a little bit about Estonia because I had a lot of friends in New York that were from Estonia or Russians, Estonians, and I knew a little bit about it. I somehow thought it was going to be a lot more like, you know, USSR kind of thing. So when I came here, I was very surprised and pleasant, not only because of the people, also the structure and the architecture was actually quite different from what I was expecting. So I was expecting like, you know, all rundown business, buildings and everything, but I was actually quite pleasant to have that experience. People always talk about Estonia being like a cold place and therefore people are very cold. I never encountered that. I actually had always warm people. It was quite hard to kind of get into their heart per se, you know, the kind of like acceptance, but I'm the kind of guy who always tried to make my own environment, and I always try to make jokes around things and make them feel more comfortable around me. So I never had any complaints whatsoever.
That's cool. For example, I came to Estonia for my very first time in 1997, and I came from East Germany, and all the East Germans warned me, oh, don't go to Estonia, it's dangerous, you're never going to leave. Meaning that I would be killed or something, but they were right, I never left. I left and then came back.
Where do you live, Stuart?
I live in Tallinn. I've lived here for about 7 years. I live in an apartment actually, and I've always found it very interesting living in an apartment. You have neighbors you've lived with for years. You have no fucking clue what their first name is. You just know their last name because of, you know, sharing expenses on the bills and stuff like that. Which is I'm an American citizen. It's very unusual for me to not actually know the names of the people I live next to. What about you?
Well, actually I live in Sakwa, I live in a house. I live in a small village, so about 60 houses. Most people that I know around my house, I know their first names. So it has not been an issue. Actually, the opposite for me. When I lived in New York, I lived in a big building and I never knew anybody's name. So it's kind of a refreshing change of pace for me to be here, being able to know my neighbors' first and last names.
Well, there's a sizable Estonian population in New York. Maybe they exported some of that Estonian culture.
That's probably what it is. But I actually love it. I mean, my first experience in Estonia was living in an apartment in a flat. And I hated it basically because of that. I felt like I was trapped at all times. So 2 years later after I arrived, I became a homeowner. And that was the first thing I wanted to do. I wanted to just invite people over and have always a connection with the neighbors. So.
Well, I still interact with people, my neighbors and stuff. For example, today, you know, I live in like an old-fashioned building that's been beautifully restored, and we have a nice backyard that we all contribute into. And there's a slightly older woman. I don't want to presume her age or anything. And she has her own flower bed. And I was outside talking to her today. And I just decided to play a little joke on her. She's showing me, oh, this is the first tulip that's blossomed and stuff. And I said, well, I hope you don't mind, but a couple of weeks ago I planted some seeds in this corner of your flower bed. And it's supposed to be a really beautiful flower. It's going to grow to be 3 or 4 meters tall. And she's like, what's it called? And I said, koruput, or I think that it's called hogweed, which is an extremely poisonous flower. And it basically fucks like bunnies. It goes everywhere. You can't get rid of it. And the look on her face was classic, like. And then I told her I was just joking, and I don't think I'd ever seen that woman laugh so hard.
She was like 6 or 7 years. No,
I really appreciate it.
I think, you know, talking about this, for example, one of the things I love about living in the house is that you know, I can go to my backyard, and in the summer you see my neighbors cutting the grass or planting or whatever. So that's one of the things that it kind of helped me bond with everyone around me. So I really enjoyed that as well. So it's quite interesting to know that she's actually freaking out about this plant. So I would love to see if this really comes true or not. So.
But what do you think about how Estonians cooperate in doing like common chores around the house?
Well, that's one of the things I actually loved about it the most. I have a fortune to have a wife who actually likes to contribute around the house, and for me it's kind of strange because
You have a wife who likes to do housework.
well,
Sorry for interrupting.
nice. Well, I'm not used to that, because coming from a Latin American country where the women are only just in the kitchen, kind of thing. And it sounds sexist, but it's kind of like the reality. So we hear kind of like, my wife always say I'm a strong Estonian woman, and she takes pride on that. And I really enjoy that. I really embrace that, mainly because I want to make sure that if something happens to me tomorrow, I know she will be okay. So that's something that I really enjoy.
I've always noticed that there's kind of something funny. I study political science, and in political science there's something called the tragedy of the commons. That if something needs to be done collectively, if one country or one person doesn't do it voluntarily, then nobody will do it. It has to be assigned. So quite often Estonian homes or apartment buildings, they have like these rosters where they have list of duties and you have to do it. Ours, we don't have that. I just do things because nobody else is going to do it.
How is it in your home?
Now, your wife has a summer house, right?
Yes, we have a summer house in Toila. I really liked the experience the first time when I went there. Something new. I really love to, get away from the city. I personally don't like it anymore, mainly because summer house for me, it means, at least what comes to mind is relaxing time, enjoy the nature, whatever. It's not. It's the opposite. So summer house means you gotta go work and go clean the garden and prepare for the summer, whatever.
An Estonian work ethic, you relax when you're dead.
Yeah, exactly. And I refuse to go. So it's been quite many years since I've actually gone. My wife still goes every year, and she spends months, sometimes at a time with my family. But I really don't like the experience. Plus, unfortunately, most of the neighbors are really close to where we are, and don't get to communicate with them because they speak Russian and I don't. So that's actually a downside as well. So I kind of prefer to be home.
So it's kind of like the reverse of what we talked about yesterday. Like, yes. I live in a city apartment, you live in you have like this suburban house or something like that. So you actually don't talk to the neighbors when you're in the countryside.
Indeed.
Whereas I have a summer house as well in Vudurma. And what's there to say about Vudur? Nothing. No, it's a great place. I love it.
It's far away.
But my nearest neighbor is literally 700 meters as the crow flies. But to actually get there, it's a 2-kilometer walk or drive. I know the neighbors. I know the name of their dogs. And there's an older woman who lives across the street from those neighbors, and she only speaks Vudurokia, like this Vuduru dialect. And it's kind of a dying dialect. And I actually kind of understand her. I do speak some Estonian. But I've always found it's the exact opposite. But yeah, I go there and I'm doing anything but relax. Like, it's just go there and you're chopping wood and mowing the lawns and there are horseflies.
But I would like to know what is the benefit of that. Yes, I understand. We do work. I have a house and I have to clean out the yard. I have to cut the lawn mow the lawn, or whatever needs to be done. But if you want to have a summer house where we can go and relax on the weekend, why don't you do that? Estonians, why don't you do that? Relax. Work in the beginning of the summer and then enjoy the rest of the summer. But it's like going there for me is equals hard labor and for free. So
well, there's an expression I've noticed over my 23 years in Estonia that Estonians like to use this expression to recharge their batteries. And so they always go to the forest to do this. So for me, it's almost like the idea of having a summer house is so you can go there and work your ass off all weekend long. And then in the evening, you can take 5 minutes, walk through a forest, if there's even still one there before they cut it down, and recharge your batteries.
Yeah, but the forest is there. You can go and relax and enjoy the forest without going and do the hard work. My opinion anyways. But yeah, so that's one of the things I really don't like. So people always say, oh, you're so lucky you have a summer house. No, you're so lucky you don't have one.
Interesting opinion, yeah. I really like where my summer house is, though, because it's named after an animal. I'm not going to say that because I don't want to give away the location. But we have moose, we have beavers, we have deer. We've got
everything. I'll let you know where it is.
Yeah, he's been there. I actually, this past weekend we were there. I actually got a photograph of a beaver in the creek that goes through my property.
I haven't seen a beaver in a long time.
I thought you were married. Oh, that's why. Okay. Yeah. Basically, during the Soviet Union, Estonia is a former Soviet republic, as Estonians don't like to say anymore. They don't like to say we're Eastern European. They say we're Nordic, which is still better than saying Scandinavian.
I really feel like, I'm with them in that aspect. I think we are very Nordic.
But do you know anything about land or property ownership during the Soviet Union?
I had the chance to talk to my wife's grandmother, and she can explain a bit of what happened. Not in detail, because obviously my Estonian is not the best. But I like the fact of the idea of how the Soviet Union kind of developed the ownership of properties, etc. But obviously it doesn't work, and it was kind of rude. It was a kind of rude awakening for the Estonian people when this was implemented or forced, I will say, into their lives. So, but
you mean the common ownership?
Right.
Yeah. So basically, for those of you who don't know, you couldn't really own your own property. You had the right to live there. Everything was owned by the state. So when the Soviet Union fell, a lot of people had older properties that had been taken from them, and they were forced out of their homes. Some were sent to Siberia, and we all know these stories, and we'll talk about these in other podcast episodes. But in the 90s, when Estonia got re-independentalized, or whatever the word is, I don't even know, re-independence, basically people got these certificates based on how long they had worked, and they could use these certificates to redeem them and privatize land. It's a little more complex than that, but that's the basic idea. Other times, if you could prove that your grandparents owned that property, you could basically get that property back.
How will you be able to prove that?
Records. There were archived records of all this stuff. And so we talked yesterday about my summer house. There's a beautiful building right across a river. And the story goes that there was an old couple who lived there. Somehow they'd been given the place to live, the right to live there, their entire lives. They loved it and took care of it. And then it turned out that some woman who lived in Tallinn, her grandfather had previously lived there. And he's forced out, he's long gone out of the picture. She wanted to privatize that land and get it back. But she had never even been there. And so the old couple offered to pay rent. They just wanted to stay in their homes. And she refused. She said, no, it's mine. And she kicked them out. And basically the idea is that they spent the rest of their lives in a small panel building in Vudro.
Was this couple also Estonians? Or?
Yeah, everybody was Estonian, yeah. But the woman in Tallinn forced them out, and they died of a broken heart like 2 years later. And now, the house has collapsed. Nobody takes care of it.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because just 2 summers ago, my wife and I went with the family. Actually, we had a family reunion, and we went to this Narva river. And within the Narva River between Russia and Estonia, for those who don't know, there's several islands. And we actually went with one of the historians of the family, and we visited, or at least from the distance, some of the islands that used to belong to my wife's family. And they were actually kicked out. Actually, the border crossed them, and the islands are now either in between the countries or in the Russian side. So it's quite interesting to know that this kind of occupation of land ownership at work, because at the same time I was wondering how would that work if they would want to claim this land back. I mean, there's several little islands that actually belong to the family. There are records and of this property being owned by them.
And there's no hope of your wife's
family
claiming it back.
They're right now in Russia.
Yeah, so there's absolutely no hope because Putin is so easy to work with.
Who's Putin?
Yeah. I'm just curious, what do you think about Russians as a people? Russians in Estonia?
Well, okay, Russians in Estonia, because that's quite different for me. I have different experience in Russia, with Russian people in New York and the US. I never had a problem with anything coming from their nationality, backgrounds, or the way of being as people. I actually find them quite charming, find them quite funny, with a great sense of humor. And once you get to drink with them, I always have a great time. So actually, when I met here with Estonians, I'm like, oh, I really like the Russians. They're quite surprised because they kind of expect a different reaction from me. So I don't know what will be your reaction in this case. But
well, I definitely agree about the drinking part. Like you could have like a person who's kind of closed maybe, or maybe a little bit more open, but once they start drinking vodka, it's like another person comes out. And then another person comes out from that, and then another. No, I'm making a Matryoshka joke. I've always found that Russians, be they Estonian Russians or Russian Russians, are some of the most hospitable people I've ever met. Like they're extremely welcoming.
One of the things that I could tell you right now, for my experience with Estonian Russians, is I never understood, and I think I mentioned that to you before in the past as well, is that how they identify themselves as Russian. One of the things I'm always curious about, why do they identify themselves Russians when most of them have been born here in this country? So. And I'm going to go a little political in that. When it comes to me, if you are born in a country, regardless of what your background is, that's what you are.
Not according to Trump.
Forget about Trump, he's gone.
Yeah.
But, for example, I always say that, I have many friends that are here, they're Russian background, as I always like to call them. They were born here, their parents were born here, and they claim themselves they're Russians, but they've never been to Russia. Even the Russian is not even, most of the time the Estonian is even better than their own Russian. So how do you identify yourself a Russian person if you've never even been to the country?
But I've heard so many stories about Russians meeting an Estonian Russian, and they say, oh, you have a weird accent or something like that.
A lot of times they don't even understand each other.
Like you don't know what it means to be Russian, like the Russian Russians would say.
And I actually work with, I think it's 80 or 85% of the population of the crew in my company is Russians. Russians from Russia, and about 5% Russians from Estonia, and they always have this argument within each other. Like, why do you consider yourself a Russian? Why do you don't know what it is to be a Russian?
Yeah.
And I'm always curious about that, because people feel like explain to me a little bit how do you feel about that, because I really don't understand. As for example, I was born in Costa Rica. I consider myself Costa Rican, even though my mom is part Chinese and my father is Lebanese. So, but if you ask anybody in my family, we're Costa Ricans, period.
Yeah.
So how is that working, for example, with Estonians here, and in your case?
So you're born in Costa Rica and then moved to America, became a citizen, and so you left.
Right.
Now you're here.
Right.
But you're not an Estonian citizen.
Nope. I can't. They don't let me.
Не хорошо.
Я не понимаешь.
I have a wonderful story about some of my first encounters with Russians when I first got here. I've always found that my very first time in Tallinn, I was walking through Raikoja, which is the town hall square, and the cafes were open. It was in summer. And I thought, wow, this place is full of French tourists. Why? I've studied in French and stuff. And then it turned out as I got closer that no, they're not French, they're Russians. That Russian and French, the languages, sound exactly the same from enough of a distance.
From
and so it was just hilarious, yeah.
Well, I've always been confused by a Finnish person, so that's okay. Maybe that's the case. It's irrelevant at this point.
So how long, I've already asked you how long you've been here, but what were some of your first observations about what Estonians thought about you?
They always thought I was either, one of the things I always have, obviously I don't look Estonian, but they always talk to me in Russian. That's the first thing. So I always found it odd. They always talk to me in Russian, and then I realized I asked questions to why do you talk to me in Russian? Why no English or any other language? And they say that I have this Georgian or Armenian look. Of course, when I came here, there was not so many foreigners. So there was the clarity of having you being Russian or Finnish in this case, it was always the only tourism they had at that point. So I really thought, I never thought in my life that I would look like a Russian person, or somebody with that. So.
Yeah, when I first got here and I started learning Estonian, the way that I learned Estonian, this is kind of funny, there was literally nothing to do. I lived in Tartu for 15 years.
So they told you how to say 12 months?
Oh, we'll come back to that another time. But I bought a TV and I started watching old American TV shows from the 80s, like A-Team. And I would just listen to the audio and read the subtitles, and that's basically how I learned Estonian. Aktsenti. That explains my accent as well, because I just never had practice. But when I would go to a shop and I had to ask somebody something, heaven forbid you ask an Estonian cashier for anything. They're just like, what does that mean? It hits at you practically. They would always respond, I would speak Estonian to them, they would respond in Russian. And then it dawned on me, like, people have never heard an American accent in Estonian before. They'd only heard two accents, Finnish, or maybe three accents, Finnish, Russian accent in Estonian, and then like foreign Estonians, exiled Estonians.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, but they had never heard like a person who was just learning Estonian.
For me, that's the case. I mean, one of the things that I'm still learning Estonian, of course, it's been a couple of years, but it's still, I don't consider myself a fluent speaker. But one of the things I always hated, for example, was watching television here was always very confusing. I tried to learn by watching TV. It's impossible for me because first of all, I don't like to read so much, and second of all, you guys do this dubbing with the only one person talking, which drives me insane.
Oh yeah, like the South American soap operas.
So you watch the freaking novellas, which is South American soap operas, and for example, I will never forget the first day I was watching somebody fell in the well, some little girl was screaming, help, 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 ayúdame, ayúdame, and some guy's like, uppy. I'm like, what the is that? Where's the emotion? So I was like, there's no way I can learn that. But however, what I do is, and the way that I've learned, and my kids always laugh, is I do listen to the radio a lot, especially this hommikul uudised, and that way I get to practice language, and I'm actually repeating everything they're saying, and that kind of helped me a little bit to get the accent close enough to make myself understood when in the street. So,
what I've always found funny is that Estonians always want to test foreigners who say that they speak Estonian. They're like, "Oh, I don't believe you. It is impossible. I can't do an Estonian accent at all." So for some reason it comes out French. I do not believe you. Say And I'm like, And they're like, oh. They're always disappointed when I'm actually able to do it. So sometimes I like to fuck with them. They're like, oh, so you speak Estonian. You say you speak Estonian. Say And I say They're like, no. I'm like, no. Is basically this O with a squiggly diacritical that exists in Spanish.
Yeah,
I just like to mess with them so
in
much.
my case, I do the opposite. I always say I don't speak it. Mm-hmm. So they always like to bullshit in the background. And I was filming a commercial like a week or so ago, and two girls were saying, I hope he makes a lot of mistakes so that way, because they were getting paid by hour, I hope he makes a lot of mistakes so we get more money. And I turned around and said, Misasya. And they were like, their eyes were like so big. They're like, Estonians. And I'm like, of course not, you know. And they were really surprised that I understood. So I always tell people, pretend not to know anything, because it's more, beneficial for me just to surprise them. So.
Now, we talked yesterday or a couple of days ago. We talked about our summer house experiences and our impressions of how Russian sounds like French at a distance.
Yeah.
So I was at my summer house one time. There was this big international thing called Operation Seal or Operation Hedgehog. This big international thing. But I was basically, after a long day's work at my summer house, I was having a beer and I'd made a little bonfire and I'm just sitting there, and suddenly I heard men walking up the little road that goes through my property. Mm-hmm. I don't have any neighbors. And so I got curious, like, who the hell is that? And then I heard that they were speaking Russian. And I looked and I saw a bunch of soldiers with huge machine guns walking up, and they're just speaking Russian to each other. And they even had the Russian flag on their arm, and I'm like, oh, the shit's hit the fan, man. What do? Do I hide or do I just turn myself in? Because,
run!
I have a bow and arrow, but that's my only defense. As they got closer, though, it turned out that they were French, and they had the French flag basically upside down or backwards, as they do
honest mistake
on soldier uniforms quite often. And we started talking. I mentioned earlier that I'd studied in France. They were shocked as hell that an American citizen was in the middle of the Estonian forest who spoke fluent French. And we started, all they had to do was basically, their assignment was to get back to their base, which was a few kilometers away, by morning. And so they had time to kill. Now, we had just had the Janipäev, or Midsummer's party, a couple weeks before, so I had tons of leftover alcohol that I'm not going to drink by myself or anything. I'm like, hey guys, would you like a bottle of vodka for your walk? And they're like, oh, hell yeah. And so we took selfies together. One of them actually I told the story about the patch. He took the Velcro patch off of his uniform and gave it to me. I still have it at my summer house. And then they left and they said goodbye, and one of them actually did this, or I don't even what hand or what direction. And that was like the first time that I'd ever seen that in this country.
Yeah, I mean, this country doesn't really have a very religious background or roots into any religion, actually, even though some people are. I was raised Catholic, and my family comes from two different religions as well, so I consider myself a bit of a religious person, but I don't believe on cultivating this as to children. I kind of believe the fact that you can have your own choice when you're already an adult. So I really enjoy how Estonians do it a little bit, even though they don't have a specific belief. But in my case, for example, I'm always welcoming my kids to ask questions about religion. So
yeah, I'm a hardcore atheist, but I wouldn't say I'm an aggressive atheist. Like, I tolerate other people's views, even if I don't necessarily agree with it. Like, how can people believe in the supernatural? Like, okay, there's no evidence for that. I've said many times that I think that the only thing that a church is really good for would be like community vaccination centers. I can just imagine the priest is like, now son, I'm going to vaccinate you.
Okay, I think
bend over for the injection.
What I think, I think that's one of the things I love about this country. I mentioned before to many people in the past that I even though I was raised with religion as a very important aspect of my life, or a part of my life, I never felt the pressure here. For example, in Latin America, you always have to go to church, you have to repent, you have to talk, tell your sins to a priest or whatever. And over here, even though I try to live an okay life, helping each other or whatever, I don't have the pressure of, repenting or the pressure of I have to go to church to make somebody else feel happy. So
yeah, I went to high school in the deep south in the U.S. and I was always pressured like, oh, did you go to church today? I'm like, no, why would I do that?
Exactly.
I was like the only person who didn't go to church.
So I mean, my kids have asked me all the time about who's Jesus Christ. So I say, hey, he was a really nice guy, and I explain more or less how this story is. But I think one of the things I love about living in this country is that I don't feel any pressure whatsoever except going to sauna. That's the only thing they pressure me about.
Yeah, that's the main religion here.
Yeah, and I really don't like it, mainly because I come from a very hot place and sweating. I don't understand how it is to sit there butt naked with some bunch of strangers, sweat until you freaking die, and then what? What is the fun? I mean, just grab some crap and beat the crap out of each other.
I've always thought it's funny how Estonia is it's like one of the top alcohol consumers per capita in the world. And according to the old beliefs, their god's name is Tara, which ironically is also the name for empty beer bottles.
Taro, yeah?
Tara. Yeah,
okay.
It's the god. It's the god of alcohol bottles.
Yeah.
But that's it for this first edition of the Estonian Experience with Stu and Jay. We hope you have enjoyed it. And see you again tomorrow, but we will have new episodes already.
Yeah, thank you all for following us. And please, 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 please join us next time.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.